I have no idea how to start this. So I think the best way to start would be to explain what we're doing. So I messaged you, like, I think we should do a more in-depth faith talk because you've done it and I've done it, but in terms of like on stage at church, which is amazing, but obviously you have more of a set time, things are a bit more constricted. And I would kind of explain that I thought we're missing a little bit of like faith talks in the UK and just like casual faith talks that people can connect with. So I messaged you and thought I'd see if you were interested, and you were. And life was busy. And we both went through kind of things like with our faith and whether we wanted to do it or not wanted to do it. And now we're here. So
Definitely.
yeah, we got there in the end. We're all cozy. I was saying to Evie before we pressed the record, I have a pumpkin candle which smells really good that I got from a Christmas market, but I'm too scared to light it because I'm scared of lighters. So we're off to a great start. But Evie looks great with her like rose wall feature in the background, which looks amazing, which I absolutely love. So I guess I'll just kick off by asking questions. We both kind of jotted down questions beforehand. None of us really know what the other's going to ask. So we've just jotted down a couple of questions. So we'll see how it goes. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, because I think something which is different in our experiences is you kind of grew up with the church and growing up with that faith and like with your parents, whereas I kind of came to it later and didn't grow up in it. So my first question is how, like, when you grow up in church, do you take it from something that you just grew up with to actually deciding to take that faith on yourself and it becoming your faith and your relationship with God and something that's useful in your life, as opposed to this is something I grew up with and I grew up going to church? Because a lot of people grow up going to church but don't necessarily have it as such a big role in their life as you do. So I was interested to know about that.
So, I mean, my experience of it is like, I do think that sometimes when you grow up, relationship's not necessarily genuine. It's one that has been very forced. And I mean, I was quite lucky that my parents never church, like it was a complete decision, but I think it can very much of, oh, it's family time to go to church now. The church that I went to when I was in my teenage years, it was a good, I think, because I got so used to just going with my family. It wasn't really a connection that I made myself. I never really felt like I needed God as such. And then like many people that do grow up in church, you hit a certain point in your teenage years where you're like, I actually don't want to do this anymore. I think for many people that grow up in church, you either become the person that just stays in church for the rest of your life, or there is a certain point where you go, I'm going to walk away from this. But I'm a big believer that a lot of people who have then grown up in church come back, but they come back at a certain point. They come back when they need it more than ever. And I think God very much calls people home. I think he gave us free will to allow us to walk away and go, you know what, God, I don't need you. And I think maybe it wasn't that I didn't need God. I think it was that I didn't want the environment in, because I think when you grow up in church, like, you're always going to be known as the child. I think a lot of people's views when you grow up in a church, they'll always look down on you as that child, as that little person. You know, you don't have to sort of come out of your shell, because even if you try and come out of your shell in your teenage years and become like this unique version of you, like, you're always going to be seen as like the little person. And for me, I was like, no, I need a break. I need to walk away. I wasn't enjoying church. It's quite difficult as a teenager going, you might have other people in, you don't have anyone outside of church. Like, none of my friends in high school were Christians. I was not laughed at, but I do think people did make jokes about me going to church because I'd post like Bible quotes and things like that. I was like, well, this is what I've grown the world completely. Am I just believing this because my family believe it? And then obviously I then came back. But I do think when you grow up in church, like, there are benefits to it, because it's like you can sit down, pray about it, you can try and work through it. And like I said, I think you also need to make that decision yourself. And sometimes if you're going with your family, you're never making that decision yourself. And I think it was only when I hit 18 and I was like, no, I need to go back to church, that I was able to finally go, right, I actually do want God. Because even when I got baptized, like, it wasn't necessarily the right time for me, because it was just what everyone else in the church was doing, and it's what I felt was the right. When you then actually come back from having a break from church, that's you actually making that decision, like, no, I want this. So I do, like, I'd love to bring my children up in a church environment. I would always do what my family have done, which is give freedom to actually experience it themselves. And if they don't want that, that's fine. But I believe God has a plan for everyone to bring them back. It's just whether they want that or not. So that's sort of my version. But then obviously, like, you've grown up in sort of a different lifestyle. So maybe I think if you explain yours and how you've come to church, that side of things.
Yeah, no, that is interesting about how you were saying, like, about how people see you and as like the little person, or you're so and so's daughter, or you're you know, and people can do that in the most well-intentioned way, but as you're trying to discover your own identity as like a woman and somebody that's growing up and who you are, I can imagine that it's a good thing to kind of, you know, step away and come back. I mean, for me, I grew up like with my mum as a Buddhist and going to Buddhist things and that kind of thing, and I was very assimilated into that culture. We were very invested in a Buddhist lifestyle, and my dad is kind of agnostic, you know, doesn't really know what he believes. And then for me, I kind of stepped away from all faith. I wouldn't say I was an atheist, I just didn't really think about it. I was too busy being a teenager, really. And then I just kind of had a period of time where, you know, I just wasn't happy in life. It just wasn't, things just weren't, I tried everything my way and it wasn't working. I'd been bullied at school. I was drinking too much most of the time, ended up in really awful situations. I was just like not in that like space to really like to nurture my own soul or see my own value in anything. I was very invested in the culture. You know, I would I would hate school. I had great friends, but school wasn't a good place for me at a time. And I was like, you know, but then I became invested in the phone world and the internet world. And I think you'll probably be aware of this. There was a certain period of time in our, you know, young teenage times where there was a lot of content on social media with Tumblr and MySpace, which really glorified mental illness.
It really did.
Yeah, it wasn't mental health awareness in the way that we know it now. It was like glorifying mental illness. So their like mental health awareness for me took me down a route of mental health that I don't know I would have otherwise gone down, because it made me aware of things like self-harm and things like that otherwise I wouldn't have been aware of. And then so I became very like invested in a very sick culture, and if you're living completely in a sick culture, you get sick yourself. I think if you're like 13 as I was then, just looking at all these like images and all these quotes and like videos and things online, it's going to cause issues in your life, which it did for me. It definitely did. And I was the person that was like putting out all the like mental health stuff, and you know, and I do it now, but I try and do it in a different way, in a more like thoughtful way, because I was doing it for the wrong reasons, as those people were doing it for the wrong reasons. And I ended up, rather than like just accepting that my emotions were telling me that something was up and my emotions were actually trying to help me, I like medicalized my emotions, and like I was finding all my identity in medicalizing my emotions, that I just stopped listening to them. I was like, oh, if I'm feeling that way, it's 100% because I'm depressed. that's not taken away from anybody else's experiences, but this is just very like unique to where I was at that point, that I was attributing a lot of like, it's really, really normal to feel depressed if people are bullying you. It's really normal to feel depressed if, you know, you've had divorces in the family, or, you know, you're abusing alcohol. It's really normal to feel depressed in those situations. But I was like just medicalizing it. And then I was like, I've tried to find my identity in all these things. And I remember one night when I was 15, I was in my room and I was like, I'm gonna, you know, pray. Like, I was like, I feel a bit silly doing it. I'm probably doing it to an empty room, but I'll give it a go. And I prayed, and I really felt like God met me there. I just had this feeling, and it's hard to describe. And that wasn't like a light bulb moment in life, really. It was that I knew God was there, but I wouldn't say I suddenly overnight changed the way I was doing things and 100% was happy overnight, and then I was living like a saint the next day. But it was like a huge moment in life. And then further from that point, I found my identity in God rather than in worldly things. So I think then I started to get more interested in just religion and in church. And I tried being a Quaker for a while, and that's still something that's close to my heart, and how those people welcomed me. And then I did a few Bible study things because I was curious about this interaction that I had. And I did feel like God met me. I've never had an experience as strongly as that again, but I remember that experience. And then from then, it's just grown and grown and grown to where it's a very, very, the most significant element of my life now. And it's the foundation of all that I do. But I would say that's how I got from where I started, which was from a non-religious background. And I went to a secular like primary school, but there was a lot of Christian culture in it, hymns and things like that. There was a lot of that, so I was aware of it. I mean, I'm curious with you, like, I was, you know, thinking of like asking this question later, but I think it ties into it well, is you've had a lot of things happen in your life. You've had a lot of really difficult things happen in your life, a lot of tough things. Like, how has God met you in those moments, or how has faith helped you, or have you felt like you might have felt like that took you away from your faith, or God didn't meet you? Like, how do you correlate those two experiences?
I mean, it's quite hard because I think growing up being like a Christian, like I would say, oh, I grew up being a Christian when these things happened, but did I actually choose God at that point? Did I actually have a personal relationship with him at that point? Probably not. I mean, like I'm very open with people, like child abuse, like sibling loss. Like I watched my sister through some really hard mental health moments, which massively affected me. But I would say like over the past in choosing that relationship, like he has met me, but he's met me when I've chosen to meet him. You know, I think everyone goes through hard times, but in them hard times you've got to let God in yourself. And I think that's one of the biggest things like I've learned through going back to church is I can look back on my experiences and go, yeah, they were horrible. Like sexual abuse is awful. I'd never want that upon like anyone. But at the time, like I was so young, and I think many people would question like, why did that happen to me? But I think now God's come and met me in the time when I probably needed it most, which is actually working through that. Because when it initially happened, like I do think God was there, but I think at that point I didn't need him as much as I needed him now, because I think dealing with child abuse hits you later on in life. Really sort of bring who I am, actually trying to build relationships, you know, like every adult, when you have your first sort of sexual experiences, things like that, it's very difficult if you've been through child abuse, because it's not normal for you, that it's not something that you might want. And I think God's been with me in all of that, and I think he's reminding me it's okay, like, you know. And I mean, the Bible, like I'd never shame anyone for wanting a sexual experience. There's great things from it. I think God at this point is going to me like, it's fine, you can work through this, like you don't have to pressure yourself to, you know, meet someone and do sexual things, like
Yeah.
that's fine. And he's like really encouraged me to sort of go to therapy, because I think people sometimes go to God and think he can fix it all. I
Mm.
worldly things that can help fix that.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that God can't fix everything, but you know, he can put it on your heart to go to therapy. He can put it on your heart to go meet people. You know, you could be praying out to God like, God, what should I be doing? And he could the next day put the right person into your life to help you fix whatever you're going through.
Yeah, definitely.
And like I said, I think he's come in when I've asked for the help. You know, I think so often like people, but even in relationships that are, you know, worldly, like unless you let someone in, no one's going to be able to help. You know, it's very much letting him in and opening up and going, I'm going through this problem, like help me. You know, it's things like just before I went back to church, like I was in quite not an awful relationship, but it wasn't one that made me feel good. It wasn't one that brought out sort of the goodness in me. And I still kept going to church while in that relationship, but something was sort of tagging on my heart, like this isn't right. And it was quite a hard sort of breakup, because I wasn't ready to be single as such. But
Mm.
I got to a point where I just said to God, I feel trapped in this. Like, give
Mm.
me a way out, like, help me out here. And he really met me in that. And I think he really, like I said, I wasn't ready to be single, but it's actually now, like, I sit here today and I think I don't actually need a boyfriend. I'm so happy, independent. And that's only because of God, because it's like I remind people now, like, the goodness and the fulfillment you think you can get from someone else, you can only get in God. And I think he's really met me in them situations. I think it's just reminding yourself to open your heart to him and to be vulnerable in them scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, that is like so true that God can place the right things and use the right resources. And I think sometimes like I mean, I can probably be guilty of it, of thinking, oh, well, I don't need those worldly things. I just need God. But actually, God, you know, created the world and he's created the things in it that can help us. And actually, going to therapy isn't taken away from God. It's like God probably put the therapist right there when you needed them. And I think like it's so like I'm always so inspired by how you have kept your faith even when you've had moments where you've doubted or you've wobbled, as I think anybody that like walks in faith does. How, because I think a lot of people when they've been through what you've been through would have been like, I never want anything to do with the church ever again. God, like, never want anything to do with it again. And I think that's so inspiring of people which are like going through things can hear that and be like, yeah, I'm going through something, but that doesn't necessarily like disprove God. And I can understand people feeling that way. I can completely understand where people are,
Definitely, yeah.
I don't feel God in this moment. And I've had moments in life where I'm like, God, where are you? Like, God, please show up. God, where are you at? Like, I think we all have moments like that. But the fact that God has re-met you and like at different points and like brought you back, things like that, I think is, I mean, it definitely inspires me, and I think it'll inspire anyone that listens. Definitely.
I think it's just a lot of the time, like, people sometimes don't have that example of Christians being so vulnerable
Mm.
about their situations. I think people view the church as like the perfect place filled with like perfect people, when in actual fact, like, even if you read the Bible, for example, like there are people in there who aren't perfect, who their
Oh,
lives aren't amazing. I mean, look at the disciples. You know, Jesus handpicked them. They were very broken people. They were bad people before they became a disciple. And look at Peter, for example, like he is someone who, even when he became a disciple, had so much suffering. You know,
yeah.
he was prosecuted for his like sort of faith, but he chose to keep on going and keep on pushing through that. And you know, he's now probably up in heaven living his best life. But I think it's setting, like, you know, when we all end up in heaven, he'll be there partying. But it's one of them where, like, I think it's nice for other people to see suffering that other Christians have sort of faced. And even though obviously it's not great for someone to go through suffering, it's reminded them like these people are very normal. These people with faith are very normal. And I think it's also quite inspiring. Like, I look at other Christians who have had quite a hard time, and I think the fact you're still so on fire for God tells me that there's something different about you. And if, you know,
Mm.
I'd rather go through a hard scenario and have Jesus, you know, and have that sort of person that's always going to be there for me, than going through a situation on my own and turn to the wrong things.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, I think often Christians worry about showing their vulnerability because they think that to non-Christians it will like disprove what it's doing in our lives, and or be like, oh well, your life's not a lot better blah, 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 because you're, even though you're following that. And I think, or looking at things that Christians are doing, and when Christians mess up in the way we treat others, it's like, well, I don't want to be part of that because look how these Christians are behaving. And I think one of the things that I always have to keep in mind when I see those things is like the church is made up of people and people are fallible. Like the disciples, like you say, were flawed. So many like great people in the Bible were flawed, like Saul to Paul, and like there were quite a few like redemptive stories in the Bible, and a lot of transformation, and a lot of, if people weren't flawed, we wouldn't need grace, we wouldn't need that salvation, we wouldn't need God to meet us there. And I think that's something that I think of is like, yeah, Christians definitely don't always go out into the world and act the way Jesus acted. Jesus is the aspiration, but we're all falling short of that all the time. And so that to me helps heal that disconnect of what we can see happening in the world and then who God is,
Yeah.
And I think that you like demonstrate that so well, like how you've had these things happen, but you're like, you still come back to that who God is rather than who the people are. So I think that's amazing and very inspiring.
I mean, like my next question for you, because I think everyone always asks like the good question, like of how's like Christianity improved your life. I actually want to know what the hardest part of becoming a Christian actually was for you. What has been difficult when becoming a Christian?
That's a good question. There's been a few things. I mean, I think one of the things is how once you become a Christian, I think it's really hard to see the world the way you did before, or the way when you're without faith. So it can be hard to tap into those connections you had with people before you were Christian, because you're living with a completely different mindset. I see the world differently. Even when I'm in periods of doubt, I still want to fix my aim on a certain thing. So it can be hard to re-tap into your old interest, your old things. And we talk about like a lot of the bad things we leave behind when people become Christian, and the amazing thing they walk into. But there's also a lot of good things and good connections, like for instance, we were talking before this recorded about dating and how much easier it was just to date before I became Christian, and before I wanted that Christian connection with whoever I dated, how much easier it was to date, like things you don't even think of. You don't think when you become Christian, because when I became Christian, it's become a bigger part of my life as I've grown with it, as I've kind of grown with it, and it's become more significant to me. But when I started, it was a seedling, so I didn't prioritize faith in my partners or who I was dating. And as that becomes a more significant thing, it's like dating isn't as easy when you're looking for these specific things of somebody that's on fire for God, because you may find the most amazing person that doesn't believe in God, and you're in that conflict. But I think another thing that I found difficult since becoming a Christian is the moments of doubt, those moments of like becoming Christian and talking about what an amazing thing it was for your life, that you almost feel guilty when you have moments where you question it all. And I've definitely had moments where I've questioned it all. I've had all the thoughts of, well, why is Christianity right and not all the other religions? Like, why, like, have I based my whole life on something that's untrue? Like, why are the Christian populations bigger in certain places? Like, does God love people in that area more than he loves people in another area with different religions? That doesn't, when I've talked to you about those things and how those things like don't always make sense to me. And there's still a lot of questions which don't make sense to me, of like, the way it's done and the way Christianity plays out in the world. And particularly like into 2019, I lose track of the dates. I'm really bad with dates and stuff. My grandma passed away, and she was like the biggest influence in my life, the biggest, like, the person that just like was my rock through anything I'd ever gone through in life. She was just my best pal ever. And I went through this kind of slow burner of grief, of like this just depression, like I didn't really speak to anybody about up till recently, really, that I was like waiting, because it was so long. Previously, if I've ever felt sad, it's been really intense but short-lived. And I was kind of in these like 2 years almost of just darkness, of like, oh, keep holding on, it's past in the past, just keep holding on. But I couldn't get over the light that had gone out in the world. I couldn't get over the loss of what they represented in the world. But I thought about this recently, as I've since come out of that, and since being able to feel light and joy and everything again. I look at Abraham in the Bible and the years that he had, of like, he was 70 years old before God put the call on his life with his true purpose. You look at Sarah, and she was like 90 before she was able to have a baby, and that's what she wanted. And we focus as Christians on the miracle, and that's understandable. We know why we focus on the miracle, but I think often about, God, those 90 years, those 70 years of how long that must have felt, waiting on God's call, waiting on the breakthrough, waiting on the relief, like waiting for that moment. Because let me tell you, those 2 years felt like a long time to not feel joy, to not feel peace, to not feel connection, to not see the love in the world. Those 2 years felt like a long time. And we have all these people in the Bible that, like, we see the amazing things God did in their life, but they'd waited for a long time for that. Like that woman that had been bleeding for years, and she like clung on to Jesus's cloak, just like hoping that it would provide that deliverance that she needed, and that leap of faith that she took. But I was thinking about the amount of time she, like, of bleeding and being an outcast, in those times, and waiting on that. We have so many times where we're waiting on God, on unanswered prayers, on unanswered callings, or what seems like unanswered prayers, that we're just like, that in those times we have such doubt. Like we focus on the miracle, but actually there's a lot of times where you're just waiting, and it can feel like forever. Like a week's a long time when you feel awful. So I think becoming a Christian and changing to that mindset means that sometimes you have the expectation of deliverance because you believe in God, or you can, like, I've got a reshuffle in my seat. Or you can have the moment where you're just like looking at people which aren't Christian and they're having blessings, and then you're like, is my life any different? When there's people which aren't worshiping you every day, there's people which curse your name, and they've just been given the blessing that I've been praying for. But I think it's like that realization of it's I'm not in a transactional relationship with God, whereas I love you when you're serving me. It's easy to fall into that of like, I follow you for the blessings you give me, rather than the relationship itself with God being the reward. Because I think sometimes we pray for things that we don't really mean. We say, I pray for patience. I pray for, I pray for wisdom. But really, we want to pray for a new job. We want to pray for a new relationship. We want to pray for the new body. But those prayers don't sound good. And I think of the woman in the Bible that prayed for her 2 sons to sit either side of Jesus in the kingdom, and the honesty of that prayer. and like that personal relationship of, she wasn't praying what she thought sounded good. She was praying like what she really believed, which I want my two sons on either side of Jesus. Like, I read that and I was like, oh my God, the gall of this woman, the boldness of this woman. But I think sometimes I pray to God and I'm like, God, please give me wisdom. But really what I mean is, oh God, please just like help me sort out this situation with my friend. I don't know what to text back. So I think just knowing that just because I'm praising God's name doesn't mean that, you know, I'm going to get everything I want and it's like a wish granting tree that I can go to every time I want it, and that I should be begrudging when other people see the fulfillment of things when they're not praising. And it's like, you know that it's not right to be in that bitter mindset when somebody else is getting blessings when they're not Christian. But it's easy to fall into that because you're praising God, that you should just be, you know, rewarded all the time for it. And again, I think this is why it's good to be honest as Christians of like, sometimes we're like, what, you know, so-and-so off the TV that's, you know, promoting really immoral things, you know, is getting all these different blessings. And then there's people which are praying every day and, you know, they can't pay their gas and electric before Christmas. So those moments of doubt have been probably the hardest thing. A question that I really wanted to ask you, because I know that you've walked this Christian journey for a long time, is what ways of being Christian have you not found helpful? And then what ways have you found helpful? Because there's a lot of different aesthetics attached to Christianity. And have there been ways of being Christian that you've tried that didn't work for you, or ways that you've tried of being Christian that is a better fit?
That's actually a very good question that I have to really think about. I think one of the main things when you become a Christian is that as a Christian, you should be giving your time and giving, you know, and being that person that's like volunteering at church and joining every team that you can possibly join. And I have got a lot of respect to a lot of people that can do that and give up their Sundays, you know, to be on host team and kids team. And when I first, you know, signed up to church, it was a few months until I actually went on to join the teams. But it's kind of like I joined kids team. I loved it. But then it was like, then I was asked to join host team. And you kind of feel like, you're like, can I say yes? Or can I, in all honesty, I was like, I really want to say no. I don't want to do this. But you feel like, well, maybe God's calling me if I'm being asked to. And, you know, I think as a Christian, it's great to give your time up, you know, but it got to a point where like I was struggling because if I wasn't on kids team, I was on host team, like, you know, I was giving financially, which I absolutely love giving financially to the church, but I was finding that giving my time on a Sunday, I was just very struggling with because I was working a busy Monday to Friday, working full time. You know, I was going out every night of the week to do other aspects of my life. And I was finding so much pressure to come on a Sunday, and it became so unenjoyable to the point where I was like, I wanted to leave church because it was such a pressure.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I learned that being a Christian wasn't about giving my time on a Sunday. Like, that was just pushing me further away from God, which is quite an you know, it isn't a popular opinion, but I do think that sometimes as a Christian, you don't need to feel pressured to be joining these teams because God doesn't always call you to them. You know, someone might ask you to, but if you aren't feeling God calling you to them, it's not worth doing it. Because I've then come to learn, like, my calling was to help on a Wednesday night with Alpha. It wasn't to give my Sunday up every week, but it's just having that patience and also having that boldness to say to people at church, look, I know you might want me on this team, but it's actually not for me. Like, mental health wise, it's not doing me good. And if it's not doing me good mental health wise, I can't then help others to God. You've got to be so passionately into something to be able to do it, I think, because if you're not feeling fulfilled or if your cup, you know, is running low, how can you give that to someone else? You know, so that's one thing about Christianity, is that I've learned that unconventionally I'm not a Sunday team person. Another thing I found as well is I'm very I'd say I'm quite loud about my faith over social media, and if someone was to start the conversation with me, I'd happily do it. But I'm not a very evangelist Christian. I very much struggle with going up to people. Like if I was asked to go out onto a street and to go speak to someone about Jesus, I would probably really struggle to go and do it. That's just not, I'm very introverted, so that's not really me. But the sides of Christianity that I love is the sort of getting to talk to people, within the church environment about their stories. Like I found that being a Christian's made me more empathetic, it's made me kinder, and it's actually pushed me to do more with my life than I originally planned, and I think the only thing I've really found hard is actually finding the community to do it within.
Yeah.
Because as much as I love the sort of Christian ways, like I long to have like a connect group that I genuinely connect with.
Yeah.
But I've just unluckily not found that yet. But I believe that God will eventually place me in the right place to do that.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes to Christian sort of characteristics and lifestyle, it's about not putting the pressure on yourself with this perfect Christian lifestyle. You're never gonna have that. It's very unachievable, because I follow a lot of people on social media and things like that, that are sort of Christian influencers who are amazing people, and their lives look great. They're writing books about God, they're going and doing big talks about God, and but that brilliantly they were perfect Christian lifestyle, all these perfect Christian ways. But I definitely say I've learned that my best ways to sort of connect are, by financially giving, because it's not for everyone. But I found that once I gave my finances up to God, and even though I might not give the biggest amount on the planet, I know where it's going to, and I know it's doing it, it's going to good, and I feel not amazing for giving it, but I feel at peace, because I think the money that some people might go, oh, but you could use that on yourself, and like, but someone else needs it more than I do, whether that's I don't have my coffee, so I don't go out for dinners as often, or I don't go and do that shopping trip. I'd rather that money go to the people in my local area. Other things generally kinder to people. I noticed I no longer go past them. I would say hi, like, and I'd ask them what they needed, more than just here's money or ignoring them. Or if I didn't have anything on me today, I'd smile. I'd be calmer. If something was winding me up, I'd be more calmer and sort of think, what would Jesus do through me in this situation? And I'd just also say that another sort of thing would be going to therapy was a massive thing for me in being a better Christian, because I realized, how can I be a nice Christian to be around? How can I show Jesus's love if I'm angry all the time, if I'm not happy? It is one of those where it does affect this sort of way of living, whether you want to admit it or not, like not dramatically, but I find that it's by the sort of little changes. And I think everyone thinks that when you become Christian, you're going to start like putting it down people's throats and being very loud about it. And some people are. It's just whether you're comfortable with that or not. But the sort of characteristics I've tried to take on are just reflecting Jesus in my day-to-day life. And hopefully people can see that through me. But reminding yourself that there's not a manual of how to be a good Christian. There's a 10 commandments, but other than that, I think we so easily convince ourselves, like, you've got to be volunteering, you've got to be doing this, that, and the other. But it's, what would Jesus actually want in your life, and do it that way. And in your heart whether like what you're doing is what God actually wants for you, because you could go on a missionary to Africa or something, but unless God has actually said, like, no, Evie, I want you on that trip, you're not doing actually what God's called you to do. You're just doing what you think he wants. So it's taking that sort of step back and actually going, God, what is it you want me to do? And it's usually in the mundane, everyday things that he actually wants you in, rather than these dramatic sort of things. But it's actually stopping for a second and going, what characteristics do you want me to do, God? What lifestyle do you want me to live? Like, where can you place me to be living the life you want? So yeah, that's my view on Christian lifestyle and characteristics.
That's so interesting. I think that's like so true how you were saying at the start, like how difficult it is to like give your time to everything all the time and fit like balance a Christian, like that whole thing of wanting to be giving and wanting to be of service, but alongside the fact that we also have this flip side where it's like we need boundaries and we need to be able to protect ourselves as well. And it's like, I think when I feel guilty for not giving of myself all the time to everybody, I think like God rested on the seventh day after he made the world. Jesus and his disciples rested after a long journey. Jesus got tired too. But I think sometimes we just think we've got to just be in this thing of giving and this continuous thing of like a selfless heart, which is a great thing to aspire to. And like you, I have so much respect for people that are in those groups all the time and doing all those things. But you also need to know your own limits and your own what you can manage. So I think that is like such, and as well how you were saying about like you know the perfect Christian lifestyle. And I like you follow lots of like Christian influences and Christian people, and for a while I thought like I'm not following the people I used to follow, I'm following good role models, therefore it's great that I'm following all these people. So I was like, I'm following good role models, and those people are amazing and I love following them, I love seeing their ministry, but we're just seeing a window into their life as well on social media. It's not the full picture. We're not seeing the struggles of their heart all the time. We're not. So sometimes, I follow a lot of Christian influencers, and it looks like they've got the picture perfect life all the time, which of course probably isn't the case. But you think sometimes if you're following good influences, then then that's fine. But it's still like it's good to follow the good influences like we do, but it's also like bearing in mind, as you say, that don't feel that pressure to be the perfect Christian and to be like this picture perfect, living everything completely right, and just seeing Christianity as like a rule book you've got to follow, and if you fall outside of it, you're not loved and you're not worthy and you're not chosen anymore.
Definitely, because I think we can get so like in our heads, and I think sometimes people view Christianity as like God controlling your life, when like that couldn't be further from the truth. Like God is not telling you what you need to do every day of the week. He is not controlling you and putting you in certain scenarios that if you don't want it, you can walk away at any point.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's choosing to live that Christian life and choosing to maybe sacrifice certain things to live that Christian lifestyle, saying no to old habits, which for some people it is hard. It's very hard, and sometimes it's saying to a friend like, look, it's probably not good for me to see you at this point because of certain things going on, or they might not be the best of influences. And it's not saying that you have to get rid of them friends, but at certain points in your Christian journey, it's not of benefit to see them at that point. It's not that you don't love them. It's because you're maybe having to prioritize, what Jesus would want at that point. And that's not him controlling you, because you could easily go, you know what, I'm going to go see them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But you yourself need to be like setting them boundaries in place. A question that I've got for you is, one of the things I've struggled with becoming a Christian is very much female empowerment, and the sort of line between what is female empowerment and what the Bible says about it. Because in our sort of generation at the moment in social media, a lot of female empowerment is, being comfortable in your body and posting your body on the internet. And I have no shame for anyone that does that, like hats off to them, but it's very difficult in what would the Bible say about that, and what does the Bible say about women and empowerment in comparison to what the world has to say about it at this point?
That's such a good question, and one I'm like trying to think about the best way to answer it, because I think you're right. We often culture's going this way and who we're called to be as Christians goes in the other way, and we've got to live in the culture, and we're all operating within the culture, but we're fixing our aim at something which is going in the completely opposite direction. And what culture says and what Christianity says are often very different. And I guess sometimes what's popular right now isn't what's going to necessarily stand the test of time in the Bible. I I think in terms of female empowerment, I always kind of grew up before I was a Christian believing that the Bible was very derogatory towards women. I believed that it was kind of backward, or it was one of the culprits in perpetrating a patriarchal structure. And I kind of thought that the Bible was unhelpful in that. But then actually, as I read the Bible myself, I saw the unique role of who women could be called to be, and the love that God has for women throughout the Bible, and the that loving role that it switched something in my head, that it actually made me um love my identity as a woman even more as I stepped into that. Um, but I do think it is a difficult one, and I think it's one of those that I think a lot of it, we think that the Bible is like anti-female empowerment, but a lot of the way it's the way the Bible's been taught to us, because there's actually not an awful lot in the Bible that says you can't learn about sexuality, you can't learn about it and do that. And I think we have a culture at the moment, that this may be a controversial thing to say, which really, really glorifies and idolizes casual sex. And while some people may find power and empowerment in that, I think, and see it was restrictive, the Christian teachings on those kinds of things, it's like, I think it's one of those things where it's realizing that it's not, like we were saying, a rule thing. It's not, you can't do this and you can't do that. It's understanding who you are, how loved you are, how valuable you are, and not allowing the culture to persuade you that you're not worthy of commitment, that you're not worthy of valuing yourself in that way. In terms of how you were saying about posting like photos of yourself online, I obviously there are things in the Bible which talk about modesty and talk about covering up, but it doesn't really go into a lot of specifics really about what's modesty, what's not modesty. So I think, rather than it being this thing of Christians using it as a weapon against women, of modesty, we've got this like, let's focus on modesty, and oh, look at all these people posting. It's about understanding the heart of it and whether you feel like you're in accordance with it. And I think a lot of people feel like if modesty is pushed on somebody, then it does feel restrictive. If you've got a whole structure of like the church, or a family, a whole structure telling you you have to hide your body, that feels very disempowering. But I think if you're coming at it from your own relationship with God, of just knowing that my body, regardless of the way I portray it, whether I have no clothes on, or whether I'm completely covered up from head to toe, has inherent value, is of inherent worth, is regardless of the way I dress. It doesn't make me less worthy or less valuable because I wear less clothes. If I wear less clothes, I'm still of the same intrinsic value that I was born with, and the same intrinsic value that I'll die with. So it's not a thing of you lower your own value if you wear less clothes, or you lower your own value if you post risque photos, because we're all intrinsically valuable and intrinsically loved. I think it's more, for me, I really like posting like skimpier photos, but there's been times where I've held back or I've reconsidered, because I'm like, whilst I feel like I look the bomb in this moment, like, and I really want everyone to show this, sometimes it's okay, me and God knowing how I feel about my body in that moment. Sometimes it's okay, me and that. And I think for me, I've got like a protective thing about myself, that sometimes I want to keep certain things private, as out of protection, because the social media world can feel so out of control sometimes. But in terms of a biblical perspective, there's lots of things that the culture is now telling us is kind and loving, and that to be seen compassionate in a Christian sense, you've got to do one thing, and to be seen as compassionate in a cultural sense, you've got to do another. So we're constantly trying to navigate mixed messages, and I don't think it's a case of one way of doing things is the right way, the other way is like the wrong way, that certain Christians are better Christians than other Christians for the way they do it. I think, and I don't think it should become a conversation which we use to exclude Christians that choose differently. I think it's just one of those things that it's like, pray about it, use your own discernment, how you feel God feels about it in that moment. For instance, there's been a lot of people, you know, wearing less clothes as part of cancer awareness, and for good messages. And there are plenty of situations in the Bible where there'd say be a rule in the Old Testament and Jesus would flip it and turn the table on it in the New Testament. There would be cases where there would be general rules, but Jesus would see an exception, and Jesus would look at that window of opportunity and go, no, this situation calls for us to be a rule breaker. This situation calls for us to flip the table, turn it on its head. So I think we've got prayer and we've got discernment within, you know, available to us with that. And I don't think it's a thing that there are any hard and fast rules to it. I am trying to be more modest in myself, because I do think I am influenced by culture that kind of convinces you that you'll have more people interested in you the less clothes you wear, that you'll get more likes on your photo the less clothes you wear. And sadly, a lot of the time it's true. But I think it's about thinking, what kind of likes do you want to get? What kind of attention do you want to get? Because yeah, I'm sure if I posted a naked photo of myself on Instagram after we get off this, I'm sure it would get a lot of attention. I'm sure if I, you know, took a really sexy photo as opposed to a really goofy one, I'd probably get more likes. But I think it's about, do you just want a high volume of likes, or do you want purposeful likes? Do you want purposeful attention? Because, and it's not unusual that we've been conditioned with growing up in a social media age to just love likes and just to love social media, just to feed off the more we get fed into. I think it's about like, okay, what kind of attention do I want? Who do I want the attention from? What likes do I want to receive? Do I just want to get like 1,000 people just swiping past my post and just liking it because they think it's good? Or do I want 5 people to look at it and it really means something to them? So I think it's about like reprogramming what's meaneful to you. And that's a really long-winded and not very helpful answer, but I think that's
that was actually really good, because I think one of the main things that a lot of people that I've spoken to, like young adult women, has been very much, they feel like they're going to get judged coming into Christianity. It's like, I myself, you know, everyone on my Instagram knows I share my check-in photos. I go to the gym. Like, my aspiration is to one time, you know, compete on a stage in figure competing, which obviously is not the most modest of things, but it's sort of reminding them that like, you are not of less value because that's what you want to do. It's a complete choice. And it's one of those where I loved what you said about how we do have prayer, and it's utilizing that. You know, I, like you, have taken a photo before, really loved it, gone to post it, and then in the back of my mind I kind of had this voice that could only be God going, do you really want to share that, or, you know, should we keep that private? Because I do believe that women can feel empowered. You can take photos of yourself, you know, and you can keep them just for yourself. You know, are you taking them for that sort of attention off others, or are we taking them for our own satisfaction? Because if you're taking them, there's nothing wrong in taking them, you know, if they're for your eyes only. You know, my biggest problem is sort of very much, I struggle with this line of sort of modesty, and what is deemed modesty. You know, in the Catholic Church, they've got some sort of rules that they have to follow, whereas obviously if you're, you know, Christian and not a Catholic, you've got a lot more freedom. It's just how we're using this sort of modesty to be of benefit. You know, like you said, there's things like cancer where it's been raised awareness for that, and I think had some of them campaigns not happened, would people have got a diagnosis? I think everything does happen for a reason with God, but it's making sure that as Christians we don't shame other Christians. I have felt shame for some of the things that I've posted, which were horrible. It's very difficult when, you know, you've been in a church environment and people have then gone to like sort of unfollow you for some of the things that you've maybe posted, you know, even if they've not been inappropriate. But then I learned that, you know what, God loves me regardless. If another Christian is going to try and judge me for what I've done, that's not God's actions, that's their own, and I just have to let it go. But I think it's creating that sort of accepting environment, because we've got to understand we're now in a very modern generation. If we want more young adults to join the church, I think the reason so many young adults leave is because they don't feel accepted. They don't feel like they fit into this sort of look, and it's teaching them that whatever they are, whoever their past is, you know, whatever they're doing, they are going to be loved, because deep down I think it's a very personal relationship with God. You know, you mentioned about casual sex. I'm very open on the fact that I'd come out of a relationship, I was still a Christian, and it felt great at the time, but then at the same time I sort of took a step back and I was just like, why am I doing this? Like, am I realistically going to meet a Christian man doing this? No, because I'm so stuck in what feels like a comfort. You know, I'm stuck with someone that feels safe, but this isn't going to lead to a relationship. This isn't going to lead to a respecting marriage. You know, this is a casual thing. And I think if you're focusing on a casual situation, you've not got the time to be actually just taking God's word in, taking everything you can from the Bible, because I don't think you can go looking for a relationship. I think God does put you in the right place at the right time for one, but how are you going to attract another Christian if you're doing things that aren't of Christian behaviors? You know, you've got, and I like what you said about sometimes people don't feel sort of valued or don't feel like they deserve that commitment. And I think that's why so many people do opt for a casual scenario, because there's not commitment in it. There's not the emotions in it necessarily. But, you know, God calls us to be vulnerable and he calls us to commitment. He doesn't set these rules in. You know, there aren't, people always go when they hear Christianity like no sex before marriage. It's not a real, it's what God created, because God created sex for a reason. He created that for, you know, man and wife to be such an amazing thing. And granted, a lot of young adults now have already had it before they meet their future husband or wife, but he put that in place for our benefit, you know. And I think even once you've had it, you can be a born again Christian and you can decide, you know what, in my next relationship I am going to save myself. You know, and that doesn't mean you're of less value. It's just putting these things in place to give you value. And, you know, following God, like, why, I think sometimes we have to go, why did God say that? Because God doesn't put things in place to harm us. He does it to benefit us. And so often as a society, you know, there's so much in films. I mean, like 50 Shades of Grey came out when I was in high school and it was this massive thing. And it's like I was saying to my mum, like, I watched that. Granted, it was an 18, so I should not have been watching it. But that was one of the first things I watched about. It's one of the first things I watched about sex. You know, I said to my mum, like, that idea should not have been my first view of sex, you know, because that was teaching a very unhealthy relationship. It wasn't teaching safe sex. You know, it was creating a really bad view of it. But I think it's also very hard because as Christians, there's not much to go off when it comes to sex as a young adult. It's not talked about enough.
1,000%. I could not agree more. And I think that for me, I've like, you know, I've talked about this on my social media of like the sexual shame that I felt growing up of, I felt like the only sex education I was given is everything that was bad about sex, everything that was not good, and like how it was, and how it was not, how it wasn't a positive thing, and all the negatives. And then I didn't see anything anywhere else. And I think we we think as often Christian communities talk really negatively about porn. And I agree, like, I agree that it's harmful, I agree that it's harmful messaging, but when you don't provide any alternative education, people are going to go to all these avenues and look for things in places which aren't going to show them healthy ways of doing things, that aren't going to show, they're not going to be able to see themselves in those videos and get their own value reflected back at them. They're going to accept lower than who they are by looking at those images and the way that people are treated. But when you don't provide an alternative, and I think this is why it's so important to not stigmatize things so much in terms of modesty and sexuality, because we need to provide an alternative, because the culture's talking about it, so people are going to get messages from somewhere, so we still need to be talking about it. And I also think in terms of like the sex before marriage thing, I think one of the big things is a lot of the times it's been seen as like virginity is this idea that once you give it away, it's something you can't get back and game over. And that's so harmful, not only for people that have, say, not been Christian and made choices when they were either, stepped away from faith, or when they weren't Christian, or for people that were victims of sexual abuse that didn't have that choice. To actually, it's not the act itself that's like this thing which, like, immediately taints everybody, and then once you do it, it's like, oh, that's it then. It's the spirit of the way that you see yourself and the way you see your interactions with others, that you can choose, that you can re-choose after you've chosen differently, that you can come back to if you've chosen different things, that you can redecide for yourself, and that you can reimagine. It's the spirit of the way that you're gonna see yourself in your future interactions. It's not like this hard and fast rule thing. And I think that that's so important. And I think, I mean, Rachel from church, I think, has just written a book around called The Sex Thing, I think it's called, talking about how in ministry we can talk about sex and talk about female bodies and talk about empowerment and all that in a healthier way with kids, which is still biblical and still within that Christian framework, but not shying away from it as lots have done in the past. And accept
definitely
we can go into this with fresh eyes, because I grew up and I had the sex education at school, and I saw what I saw in TV and what I saw. And it's not until I grew up so terrified of my own body, like the thought of putting a tampon in freaked me out. Like that was just like, I couldn't even like comprehend it, because it was just so, I was so disconnected from it. But I started to educate myself and go on Amazon, buy books, buy things, buy, everything, that I realized that a lot of the thoughts and the feelings that I was having that I thought were abnormal were actually very normal, and were actually a very common experience. It's just I'd never heard of them before. And once I heard them, it was such a life-changing moment for me to hear that people have those things and people think that in those ways, and how freeing that was. That I think, but there's going to be a lot of people that are never going to seek that out for themselves, that will never have access to those things. And I think that's why it's so important to talk about female empowerment and bodies and sex in a positive way, and talk about it positively, talk about it openly and freely, without feeling like you've just got to do exactly what the culture's doing. Because I've had those moments where I want to post my body like you have, and sometimes I'm like, I really like this outfit, and we live in a culture which is like, unless we post it, it's like it didn't happen. Unless the world sees it, it's like it didn't happen. If I go for this meal and unless I post it, I may as well not have gone out for the meal. And we can feel that way about ourselves. If I look nice today, it's like I didn't look nice today unless I posted it. So it can be that way when it comes so it's only natural that spills over to our bodies and the way that we feel like we've also got to show that. And I think like a little mantra that I've developed now is like, I saw that I was there, I saw that moment, God saw it, and that's a special moment for me and God. Like that's our moment, that's our space, and there's some things which are going to be useful in the social media sphere, like how I was talking about how as a teenager I would share things about mental health that weren't helpful, that I was sharing for the wrong reasons, that I was sharing as part of a transaction for love and sympathy and you know, for care. That now it's like, okay, no, I don't need to put everything out there, but there are certain things which putting out there that are going to be helpful and that are going to be thoughtful. And I think some of the things that you've posted, I mean, your Instagram is just amazing for anybody that doesn't like follow you should, because your Instagram every day is like being taken to church, because you post such thoughtful things. You don't like overshare. You post such thoughtful things of, you're really real with people, you're really honest, but it's such messages that I think really strike a chord with people. That's amazing. And I just thought to like wrap this up so people aren't watching this for ages. One of the things I wanted to ask you, and I guess we could both kind of answer this, is for anybody watching this that's kind of Christian, or they're not really feeling it at the moment, or they're not Christian, they don't follow God, or what would be your message for those people if they're listening to it?
I think my main message, and it's probably the cringiest and most generic message there is that you are so loved. I think in this day and age, it's so hard to feel loved. It's so hard to feel wanted. I mean, we crave it, but I think so often we crave it from people, or we think, oh, I need that relationship to feel loved or to feel wanted. Oh, I need a lot of friends to feel loved and wanted, when we already are, whether you feel it right now or not, you are. And sometimes we just accept it, and it's okay to want that from someone else, but remember that God's already given you that. You just have to let him give you that love, because we were all made unique and individual. God knew us before we were even born, but it's just that we have to accept that we are loved and we are wanted, and to be content in what we've already got. And that if you are going through a hard time right now, it's very temporary. Sometimes we believe that it is a forever thing and that we're never going to get away from it, but it is temporary, and God will get you through that. And you don't have to be going through something hard or bad right now, but if you want to reach out to God, like, he will be there, and the love you will feel from that is absolutely incredible. So like I said, very basic, but I think we so often forget that.
Amen. Like, that is so on it. And
Amen.
I don't think that's like, I don't think that's generic at all. I think sometimes it's the simple messages which are just bang on and spot on, and I think that is so true. I guess my message for anybody listening, and that is that you can choose different things for yourself every day, and you can, make one decision in the morning and make a different decision in the afternoon, and that the world may see you in the same way over and over again because of, something you said when you were 7, that you just keep getting reminded of, but God makes you new all the time. That we're constantly flawed, but we're constantly growing and moving towards things, and that, whatever space you're in, God will meet you there. And I think that's all I really have to say. I can't really follow on from what you said, but it's been good. We should do it again.
Definitely.
Amazing.
See what people think about this video.
I know. I have no idea how long this has been. So I'll sign off now.
Yeah.